Before I read the skill file, let me check the front-end design skill since this is pure story writing actually. No skill needed here. This is straight narrative content delivered in chat. Let me write it. Tell me, friends, have you ever sat at your own table, in your own home, and felt like a stranger? I had just set down my coffee mug when my son-in-law walked into my kitchen, looked around at the walls I'd built, the floors I'd sanded, the countertops I'd laid with my own 2 hands 31 years ago, and said, "Dad, we really need to talk about what happens to all of this when you can't manage it anymore." He wasn't asking. He was pricing. My name is Gerald. I'm 68 years old. I wake up at 5:30 every morning, walk 2 miles before the neighborhood is awake, and I still split my own firewood in October. My wife Helen passed 4 years ago, and when she did, I made her a promise standing in our bedroom doorway, the one with the crooked frame I never quite got around to fixing, because she always said she liked it that way. I promised her I would keep this house. I promised her I would not disappear quietly into someone else's plan for my life. I almost broke that promise. Not because I wanted to, because I underestimated how far my son-in-law Marcus was willing to go. Let me start from the beginning, friends, because this story doesn't begin in my kitchen. It begins 6 weeks earlier, on the Saturday of my 68th birthday, when my daughter Diane threw me a dinner party in my own backyard. I should have loved it, and I did, at first. Diane had set up string lights along the back fence, the fence I built the summer she turned 12, when she used to hand me nails and ask me questions about everything. She'd put out a good tablecloth, the blue linen one Helen always kept for holidays, and there were maybe 14 people there. Old friends, a few neighbors, my buddy Carl from the woodworking club I've been part of for 19 years. It felt right. It felt like something Helen would have organized. Marcus arrived 40 minutes late. He came in through the side gate with his phone at his ear, one hand raised to everyone like a politician entering a room, and he sat down at the table without apologizing for the time. He's 41, works in commercial real estate, and he has the particular confidence of a man who has never once been told no by anyone he respects. He doesn't respect me. I've known that for years. I simply chose not to make it a problem. That evening, I decided to make it a problem. Here is what happened. We were about 45 minutes into dinner. I had been telling Carl about the chest of drawers I'd been building in the garage, quarter-sawn white oak, hand-cut dovetails, the kind of work that takes time and doesn't apologize for it. Carl was genuinely interested. He was leaning forward, asking about the finish I planned to use, and I was in the middle of explaining why I prefer an oil varnish blend over polyurethane when Marcus set down his fork and said, loudly enough for the whole table to hear, "Gerald, nobody here knows what any of that means." The table went a little quiet. I looked at him. I said, "Carl knows." Marcus smiled the way he always smiles when he thinks he's being charming. "I just mean, all due respect, maybe it's time to think about simplifying things. You've got this big house, this big yard, all these projects. That's a lot for one person." Diane touched his arm. He didn't look at her. "I'm doing fine," I said. Sure, he said. "But for how long, right? That's the question." I let it go. For Diane's sake, I let it go. But Marcus wasn't finished. He never is. After dessert, when people were starting to drift toward the back of the yard or refill their drinks, Marcus followed me to the garage. I'd gone in to get a second extension cord for the lights, and he came in behind me and closed the door almost all the way. He looked around the garage the way a contractor looks at a job site. "You know," he said, "Diane and I have been talking." "Is that right?" I said. "There are some really beautiful communities about 20 minutes east of here. 55 and up, pools, activities, people your own age. You'd have so much less to worry about." I kept my voice even. I said, "I'm not moving into a retirement community, Marcus." He tilted his head like I'd said something naive. "Gerald, the upkeep on this place alone, the taxes, the insurance, it's a burden. And if something happened to you in here alone, God forbid, nobody would even know." I looked at him for a long moment. I said, "Are you concerned about my safety or about this property?" He laughed. Not an uncomfortable laugh, a relaxed one. The laugh of a man who believes he's already won an argument that hasn't started yet. He said, "We could really help Diane and the kids get established if there was some equity freed up. You understand." I told him I understood perfectly. I told him I'd think about it. I did not plan to think about it. What I planned, though, I didn't know it yet, not completely, was to let Marcus show me exactly how far he intended to take this. Because I've built enough things in my life to know that you don't stop a problem at the surface. You find the root, and you pull it out clean. 3 weeks after the birthday dinner, on a Tuesday morning, I was in the garage, working on the chest of drawers when I heard a car in my driveway. I wasn't expecting anyone. I came out and found Marcus standing next to a younger man I didn't recognize. Early 30s, blue blazer, a leather portfolio under his arm. They were both looking at the roofline of my house. Marcus saw me and didn't flinch. He said, "Hey, Gerald, this is Preston. He's a colleague of mine. I hope you don't mind. I've been meaning to get an informal sense of what the property could list for, just so you have the information." I stood at the edge of my garage and looked at the two of them standing in my driveway, and something shifted in me that I don't fully have words for. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was clarity. I said, "You brought a realtor to my house without asking me." Marcus said, "Informal, like I said, just information." I said, "Preston, I appreciate you driving out here. This property is not for sale." Preston, to his credit, looked at Marcus with an expression that said this was not entirely the situation he'd been told to expect. He said something polite about leaving his card, and I told him that wasn't necessary, and he got back in his car. Marcus stood there after Preston left, and for the first time since I'd known him, he didn't have the easy smile. He said, "Gerald, you're being unreasonable." I said, "Go home, Marcus." He said, "Diane is my wife, and this is her family home, and I think she has a right to—" "Marcus." I kept my voice completely level. "Go home." He left. I went back into my garage and I sat on my work stool for about 10 minutes, without moving. Then I picked up the phone and called my attorney, a woman named Lorraine who has handled my affairs since Helen and I refinanced this house in 2003. I told her what had been happening. I told her about the birthday conversation, about Preston in the driveway, about the retirement community suggestion. I told her I wanted to make sure everything was current and airtight. Lorraine listened. Then she said, "Good. Come in Thursday." I came in Thursday. We updated my will, reviewed the title, and she walked me through exactly what my rights were, as the sole owner of my property rights that were considerable, and rights that Marcus had been betting I didn't fully understand. Lorraine also suggested I document things going forward. Keep a record of conversations, dates, what was said. I started keeping that record. Here is what I want you to understand, friends, about the next 2 weeks. They were quiet. On the surface, completely quiet. Diane called me twice, both times normal conversations about the grandkids, about whether I was sleeping okay, about nothing in particular. Marcus didn't reach out. I had Carl over on a Friday evening and we worked on the chest of drawers together and ate sandwiches in the garage, and it felt like the best kind of normal. But underneath the quiet, I was paying attention. The chest of drawers took shape beautifully in those 2 weeks. Quarter sawn white oak does something particular in certain light. It shows a medullary ray pattern, almost like silk grain running through the wood, and you can't rush it and you can't fake it. It responds to care and to patience. Helen used to say that everything I built in that garage was a letter I was writing to the future. I've been thinking about that a lot. Then, Diane called on a Sunday evening, and her voice was different. She said Marcus had told her about my reaction to Preston, and she said she thought I was being stubborn and that I needed to think about the family, not just myself. She used the phrase, "your age," twice in 2 minutes. I let her finish. Then I asked her one question. I said, "Diane, do you actually want me to sell this house?" There was a pause that told me everything. She said, "I want what's best for you, Dad." I said, "That's not what I asked." Another pause. Then she said quietly, "Marcus thinks—" "I didn't ask what Marcus thinks," I said. "I asked what you want." She started crying. Not the kind of crying that's manipulative. I know that kind, but the real kind. The kind that sounds like confusion. And I felt for her. I genuinely did, because she is my daughter and I love her. And I also understood in that moment that she had been told a version of this story by her husband that made me the difficult one, the stubborn one, the old man who wouldn't listen to reason. I said, "Come over Tuesday. Come by yourself. We'll have coffee and we'll talk." She came on Tuesday. I made her coffee the way she likes it, 2 sugars, a splash of half and half, and I sat her down at the kitchen table, and I pulled out the folder Lorraine had put together for me. Not to threaten her, not to lecture her, just to show her what was real. I showed her the will, which was clear and updated. I showed her the property deed. I showed her a printed summary Lorraine had written of my rights as a homeowner and what it would actually take, legally, to transfer or sell this property. Nothing Marcus had been implying was possible without my full consent, in writing, of my own free will. Diane sat with the folder in her hands for a long time. Then she said, "He told me you were confused about the finances." I said, "I am not confused." She looked up at me and I watched something rearrange itself behind her eyes. Not anger at me, something else. She said, "He brought a realtor to your house." "Yes," I said. She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't know about that. He didn't tell me he was doing that." I believed her. I think you believe people when you've known them for 40 years and you've watched them grow up, and you know the difference between their lying face and their genuinely blindsided face. Diane was blindsided. She asked me what I wanted her to do. I said, "I don't want you to do anything right now. I just want you to know the truth about what's been happening. What you do with it is your choice." She left that afternoon and she hugged me at the door for a long time. I stood on my porch and watched her car go down the street, and I thought about Helen and the promise I made in the doorway with the crooked frame. Now, friends, I have to tell you about the following Saturday. Marcus called me that morning. He said he wanted to come over and clear the air. He said things had gotten unnecessarily tense and he wanted to start over. He said he had good news. A community east of town had a unit opening up that would be, and I'm quoting him here, "genuinely perfect for your lifestyle." I said he was welcome to come over. I want to be precise about what I did next, because I want you to understand that I am not a man who acts from anger. I spent 31 years building things that were meant to last, and I know that the work you do in preparation is more important than the moment everyone sees. I made a call to Carl. I asked if he wanted to come by Saturday morning for coffee. Carl said yes without asking why, because that is the kind of friend Carl is. I put on a clean shirt. I went out to the garage and I uncovered the chest of drawers, which was finished now, every joint tight, every surface smooth, the oil varnish blend, showing the oak grain the way it deserved to be shown. It was the best piece I'd made in years, maybe ever. Helen would have put it in the bedroom and kept her scarves in it. Marcus arrived at 10. Carl was already at the kitchen table with his coffee. Marcus looked at Carl and clearly hadn't expected company. He sat down and he went through his pleasantries quickly, the way he does when he's working toward something. Then he set his phone on the table and pulled up a website, the community east of town, and he slid it across to me. He said, "Just look at it. Nice pool, woodworking room, organized activities. You could bring your tools." I looked at the screen. I looked at Marcus. I said, "I built this house." He said, "I know you did." "No," I said. "I mean, I built it. I poured the back patio slab. I framed the addition in 1998. I built the fence, the garage shelving, the kitchen cabinets. I built the chest of drawers currently sitting in my garage that I am going to give to my granddaughter when she gets her first apartment. I am not leaving this house." Marcus leaned back. He did the head tilt. He said, "Gerald, with all due respect, that's exactly the kind of thinking that worries us. You're emotionally attached to the property in a way that isn't rational. Irrational." That was the word he used. Thanks for watching. I had been waiting, without fully knowing it, for him to use that word. I said, "Marcus, I'd like to show you something." I stood up and walked toward the garage door. Carl stood up too, because Carl is a good reader of rooms. Marcus followed us both, because he is the kind of man who believes every room he walks into is already his. I opened the garage door, and I turned on the overhead lights, and I let him see the chest of drawers. He looked at it for a moment. He said, "Nice piece." I said, "I made that this month, with my hands, at 68 years old." I paused. Does that seem like the work of someone who can't manage his own property? Marcus started to say something. I said, "I also want you to see something else." I walked to the workbench, and I picked up the folder, the one from Lorraine, and I handed it to him. He took it. He opened it. He scanned the first page, and his expression shifted in a way I will not forget. I said, Everything in there is current as of last Thursday. My will, my title, a legal summary of what it would take to transfer ownership of this property. Lorraine, my attorney, has also prepared a letter documenting the conversations you and I have had over the past 6 weeks, including the incident with Preston. I kept my voice entirely calm. I want you to understand that I am not confused. I am not emotionally irrational. I am not too old to manage my affairs or my property. And I want you to understand that if anything resembling what you've been doing continues, Lorraine's next step will not be a folder. It will be a letter to you, directly. Marcus stood in my garage holding the folder. The easy confidence was gone. Not in a dramatic way, it didn't collapse. It just drained, the way water drains from something that's been punctured at the bottom. He was still standing there. He was just standing there without the thing that usually makes him Marcus. Carl, God bless him, walked over to the chest of drawers and ran his hand along the top surface and said, "Quarter-sawn white oak?" I said, "Quarter-sawn white oak." Carl nodded and said, "That's excellent joinery, Gerald." I thanked him. Marcus set the folder on the workbench. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said he needed to get going. He walked back through the kitchen and out the front door, and I heard his car start in the driveway. Carl and I stood in the garage for a minute. Then Carl said, "You want more coffee?" I said I did. We went back inside and I poured us both a cup and we sat at the kitchen table and talked about woodworking for another hour. And it was one of the best hours I'd had in a long time. Diane called me that evening. Her voice was quiet. She said Marcus had come home and told her what happened. And she said she had a lot of thinking to do. She said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I should have asked more questions earlier." I told her I wasn't angry with her. I meant it. I told her, "Your mother always said the hardest thing about loving someone is that you can't protect them from who they choose." I paused. "I'm not trying to protect you from Marcus. I'm just not going to disappear so he can have something that isn't his." Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know." She said it the way you say something when you've known it for a while but weren't ready to say it out loud. We talked for another 20 minutes about ordinary things, what her youngest had done at school, whether I was eating well, whether I wanted to come for Sunday dinner next weekend. I said I would come if she made the pot roast Helen taught her. She laughed, and it was her real laugh, the one that sounds like when she was 9 years old and everything was still simple. I hung up the phone and I walked through the house, the way I do sometimes in the evenings when it's quiet, through the kitchen with the cabinets I built, through the living room with the bookshelves I put in the year Diane started high school, down the hallway to the bedroom doorway with the crooked frame. I put my hand on that frame the way I always do. I said, out loud to nobody and to Helen at the same time, "Still here. The chest of drawers is in the garage, finished and waiting. My granddaughter doesn't have her first apartment yet. She's 15, and 15 feels like forever away, and also like no time at all. I'll keep the chest safe until she's ready. I still wake up at 5:30. I still walk 2 miles. The oak is stacked along the back wall of the garage, seasoning for next winter's projects. I have a side table in mind, and after that maybe a rocking chair. You do not have to be loud to hold your ground, friends. You do not have to be angry. You have to know what is yours, and you have to know it clearly, and you have to stand in the doorway of the thing you built and say, "Not this, not today, not ever." That is the whole of it. If this story found you tonight, whether you are sitting in a house you built yourself, or one you're still fighting to keep, or one you're dreaming about, I want you to know that your age is not a liability. Your experience is not a burden. 68 years of getting up in the morning and doing the work and loving the people in front of you is not something any man with a leather portfolio and a listing appointment can price. Don't forget to share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And if you're new here, stay with us. There's always another story. The coffee's still hot.